Welcome to a ditch in Cambridgeshire, but this isn't any old ditch. Right here, 2 metres below the surface, is a layer of Roman finds. In fact, this is a pretty bountiful ditch, because over the years it's produced hundreds of examples of high-quality Roman pottery like this lot, including this beautiful find, a perfectly preserved Roman flagon, which is all very intriguing, but we really knew we had to come and investigate this site when this was discovered. A Roman cheese press. Why all the excitement? Because this is Stilton, the place that gave its name to the world-famous blue cheese. Mind you, that was invented about 200 years ago. What was happening here 2,000 years ago? How long has cheese had a role in Stilton's history? We've got just 3 days to find out. Stilton sits just off the A1 near Peterborough, and it's close to the Nene Valley, a major centre of the Roman pottery industry for 250 years. So it's no surprise that the fields around this town have been producing bits of Roman pots, bowls and vases for years.
3, look at that. 4, there's just pieces, there's another one there.
Yeah. There's a bit there, look.
Oh gosh, yes. It hasn't come very far, it's not very braided, is it?
But it's the sheer amount and quality of the finds coming out of these ditches that have really caught the team's imagination. So we're not wasting any time, as we're going to have to open a very big, very deep trench before we reach any archaeology. But if the previous finds are anything to go by, it'll be worth the effort. We were just about to do a scene about this coin that Philip has just found when there was a yell from over here. So let's have a look at this one too. Finds really are starting to come up, aren't they, Helen?
Well, I suppose it's when you look very hard, you're going to find things on these interesting bumps of land.
What's this one?
It's a Celtic silver unit. Oh, goodness me. Oh, fantastic.
This Celtic or native British coin dates to the 1st century BC. Suggesting there was trade, or at least activity, going on here at least 100 years before the Romans arrived. And what's the coin that we were going to do a scene about?
Well, it's silver, and it's actually a penny, but for some reason we call them shatters or skeets these days. And it's one of the most common kinds of Series E, dates to the early 8th century, and they're found all over eastern England and Holland as well.
Fabulous finds for so early in the dig. Yeah. But do they actually tell us anything?
Well, it tells us that activity stretches back a few hundred years before the Romans were here making pottery, and a few hundred years afterwards as well.
So it looks like we'll have more than just the Roman archaeology to deal with here.
I think the signal is so strong here that there was undoubtedly a kiln at this point.
So could it be possible that the kiln has totally gone and what we're looking at is the clay underneath that has been heavily burned?
It's possible, yeah. Be disappointing.
But the real shock is in Trench 2, where we've just discovered the last thing you'd expect on an industrial site.
Well, we definitely seem to have got the shin bone here. But then look, a very nice set of metatarsals, which our footballers are very fond of breaking. What we seem to be missing in the middle is the whole of the ribs and the vertebrae, which we definitely need. Because from the teeth wear, we might be able to say something about the age of the adult, and from the shape of the skull we might be able to say something about its sex.
Yeah.
In fact, we seem to have 2 burials, as Matt's just uncovered some more bones at the other end of Trench 2. This site just gets curiouser and curiouser, and we now have 2 very different investigations on this small hill. So as the delicate unpicking of the burials gets underway, the more physical industrial dig continues, with Phil and John opening a 3rd trench over another anomaly that John's also convinced is a kiln.
Look at this burnt clay that's coming around there, and it comes around there, back along there. It's just completely, well, I want to say it's nearly circular.
It's unusual, isn't it?
Well, it is.
Over on the other site, they're still digging through metres of dark, thick clay. But over here, just inches below the surface, we've already got a really good archaeological story, haven't we, Matt?
Yep, you can see we've got the second body here. Head to the west there, feet to the east. It's very delicate, very thin bone, so I'm thinking it's probably quite a young child or something like that. We don't know the date of it yet, but it looks to me like it's cutting through these layers with all the pottery and bits of broken up kiln in it, so definitely post-Roman, post-kiln.
So would your best guess be Anglo-Saxon?
Could be, yeah.
And the first body is over here. You've got the skull.
Yeah, it's a bit of a jumble mess because we've had a bit of plough activity in this region. But, you know, we've got the lower jaw and look at its teeth, it's fantastic.
Kerry! Come over here, mate. So what are you seeing on that level?
What we've got is a much earlier Roman surface, well, at least 1.5, 2 metres below. And it's absolutely stuffed full of pottery.
Wow.
And that's from one sweep of the bucket.
And that hasn't been broken by the bucket?
No, that's old breaks. You can see the dirt on the sides there.
Francis, can you see it's got all this shelly stuff in it?
Yeah, they used to add shell. It made the pottery dry better when they were making it.
So what's your strategy going to be now?
What we're going to do is finish this and get up to the section there, then we'll clean it up and then we'll dig down into it.
It's quite gracile, isn't it? It's not robust, and this part of the mandible, it's not, you know, really chunky.
We've got no big kind of muscle attachments, have we? So if anything, that's looking
more like a lady.
But as we start to remove the skeletons from Trench 2, it becomes apparent that we haven't just got 2 burials, but the remains of up to 7 different individuals, including children and babies.
I just wanted to show you this. So I heard you talking about the teeth. There, can you see?
Oh, wow.
The molar popping through. And so obviously it was a young child. I was wondering kind of how old that would be, at what age was that?
Yes, look at that.
You look at that tooth there, it's very small, so that's, you could almost say that is in its milk teeth still.
I think that makes this as a pretty young...
About 7?
About 7, yes.
It's now clear that this was a significant Saxon site. The task for us is to try and work out what was happening here 300 years after the Romans left.
I do think we have finally got the full extent of it.
I reckon you're right.
Thankfully, the Roman element of this complex field is beginning to make more sense. In Trench 3, Phil now has something that's beginning to look remarkably kiln-like. And now that the burials have been removed, we can also confirm that Trench 2 contains a kiln, although it seems to be of a different construction to the one in Phil's trench.
I think what you've got actually, Helen, is a stone-lined cut. In other words, it could be the actual chamber of a kiln. Oh. And this is like the stone lining for the cut. That's the kiln interior, and then you would have had the fire bricks or clay lining the inner face of that wall, forming the actual furnace chamber for the kiln.
It's now almost the end of day 2, and it feels like we've got more to investigate than ever. And that doesn't even include the masses of newly uncovered archaeology in the ditch trench.
Oh, crikey, look at that lot. You can see the amount of pot we've got
Yeah.
crammed into the centre there.
The other thing about it, not only is there a lot of pot, but you can see the dark colour of the soil. There's a lot of charcoal in there, and of course there's waterlogged wood in there. Not a lot, but it's there.
I think that's quite incredible. I mean, it must mean there's a whole lot of stuff under this field, mustn't it? It's extraordinary.
And this is the trench that everyone's getting really excited about. Yesterday they were speculating that in it is a Neolithic causewayed enclosure, which is very, very rare. Francis has only ever discovered one in his life. Francis, now you've had a look at it, is this the second?
Well, I'm very excited, Tony. First thing this morning, we found this superb Neolithic flint. It's beautifully sharp, and you know, I'm very excited about it. Well, I was for about 10 minutes, and then we found this. And this is a piece of Anglo-Saxon pottery.
That's just as exciting.
Hang on, what are you saying? Are you saying it is a Neolithic ditch that's been reused in Anglo-Saxon times, or are you saying it's not Neolithic at all?
I'm saying, if it was Neolithic and reused, I'd expect a great deal more flint than this. I'm afraid I think it's Anglo-Saxon, end of story.
So why is that exciting?
Well, because they don't turn up very often, and to actually have the ditch, we have post holes, we have burials, it all starts to look like an Anglo-Saxon settlement. That's tremendously exciting.
This is Time Team. We find something, we think it's very exciting. It turns out to be something else. It's even more exciting.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
It's all right. Oh, look.
Yeah. Got some pots in there. Definitely pots hiding in there, yes.
Other parts of our investigation here have been more straightforward. Thanks to some experimental archaeology, we've now established that the local clays around Stilton were perfect for the Roman pottery industry.
Right. So how do you feel that went as a firing then, Rick?
Well, as a piece of experimental archaeology, I think it's been very successful.
Yeah.
Back on the hill, more evidence from the Anglo-Saxon period's emerging.
Brace yourself for treasure. Ta-da!
even I, as a Romanist, would recognise that as
Yep.
a significant object. It's
Absolutely.
not-
It may not be
Saxon
beautiful.
tin head.
Yep, Middle Anglo-Saxon, 8th, 9th century. So
Yeah.
it fits in brilliantly with the shatter
Doesn't it?
and with the pottery that seems to be coming out of
Yeah.
the ditch, which is really tremendous. It's really
That's
exciting.
superb.
I mean, I know it's building castles in the air, but an Anglo-Saxon ditch, a Middle Anglo-Saxon ditch round an island,
Yeah.
it's beginning to look like, oh, could be a monastery.
There are now all sorts of theories running around the site that we may have discovered a significant centre of Anglo-Saxon religion.
Oh my goodness, what's that? What is that?
It's another wall, and it's butting against the wall of the kiln. Somebody's built a wall into the kiln.
My goodness.
Hermits were effectively the first monks, and if this is a Middle Saxon hermitage, we've found something incredibly rare, because most hermitages now lie under some of Britain's most impressive abbeys and cathedrals.
We know that the way the early church was organised, that's what people did. They went and lived miles from anybody else, on retreat, we'd call it today, wouldn't we? Sort of, in isolation. No, it is speculation, but it fits the archaeological evidence for that period. So, I'm reasonably confident that's what we've got.
If it is a hermitage, how important a site does it make it?
Well, every so often we do a programme, and I think what we find, that'll go into the textbooks, because it's a good example of this or a better example of that. And I think this is one of those, You've got an enclosure from the geophysics, you've got Saxon pottery, you've got burials, you've got post-hole buildings. That's the sort of thing that's going to get mentioned in any discussion about this period or this topic. So I think it's one of those.
In so many other places, this would have evolved into one of the great Saxon and medieval abbeys and monasteries of Britain. For some unknown reason, that didn't happen here, and as a result, we've uncovered the rarest of archaeological finds, a hermitage. And this site still offers more. As the end of the day approaches, it turns out that the Saxons and Romans weren't the first people to recognise the importance of this small Cambridgeshire hill. Been a good day for you, hasn't it? You've got your kiln and you've got an Anglo-Saxon enclosure.
Look what I've got for you. Another enclosure.
Oh my God, look at
Where,
that.
where?
Look, once you focus in on it, you can see it. If I turn it that way, it's like a pair of spectacles.
But this is a double one on this side, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's your prehistoric one.
So we're suddenly back into the Neolithic again.
It could be.
We found more here at Stilton than we could ever have hoped for.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
Over there's Looe Island, off the dramatic coast of Cornwall. And to say it's got a romantic history is an understatement. You can't move for stories of shipwrecks and pirates and monks and ghosts and treasure maps. Pilgrims frequently lost their lives in these waters on the trip to a chapel on the island, which has now vanished. Here in Looe, we're investigating a story of two chapels. In the medieval period, they belonged to Glastonbury Abbey, the important Somerset monastery famous for cultivating the legends of King Arthur and Joseph of Arimathea. And according to local legend, it was Joseph of Arimathea who brought Jesus Christ to Looe Island and left him to play in the safety of these beaches while he went off to do business with Cornish tin merchants. If people really did believe that Jesus played here when he was a lad, that would have got people flocking here, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, that would have driven a whole pilgrimage industry of people coming out here to see it, and the support structure for it. It's just that sort of thing that people travel around to visit.
So you're really champing the bit now, aren't you?
Well, of course I am. I mean, the point is that time and tide are the two things that wait for no man. We've got to get off of this island by early afternoon.
And we've only got half our diggers because the others are, I don't know if you can see, just round the headland there, up on that hillside. What are they doing there, Mick?
There's another chapel over there, halfway up the hill, and they're said to be the same size. One's said to be a copy of the other one.
But the mainland chapel has been excavated already, hasn't it, Phil?
Well, that's right. I mean, partially dug, at least. I mean, in the 1930s, some local Cornish archaeologists went in there. They were slightly eccentric ideas. They were desperate that it should be pre-Norman, and they kind of labelled it Celtic.
What do we mean by Celtic, Mick?
It's a shorthand term in the West Country for something that's after the Romans, but before the Normans. But of course, we don't have Anglo-Saxons in this area, so it's a shorthand term for that Dark Age period.
And there are maps dating back to the 16th century showing a chapel right on top of the hill.
Right, that should be our excavated area in between these strings, so if you want to start stripping the turf off of that, that'll be fine. Thank you.
So with time in short supply, Phil's confident enough to get going without geophys results. And Stuart's nose for earthworks has sniffed out what he thinks is a nave for the pilgrims and a chancel for the altar.
You see, Phil's getting a bit of a wall coming out through there, which rather suggests that that's probably the first block, with perhaps that added onto it.
Right. So what do you think the timeline might be? The very early, what they call Celtic chapel would be wood, and we just find post holes.
Yeah.
Then what?
If we're lucky, we find post holes, and then we get a stone building on top of that, which is pretty small and pretty featureless, and then somebody comes along and revamps that with some nice architectural pieces, perhaps doorways, chancel arch, windows, in the 12th century. That would be my guess as to what we'd see on the site.
The structures themselves could be the best clue we have when it comes to dating, because chapels don't have the domestic rubbish that we usually rely on to date buildings. Hey, Phil, that trench is coming along, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like we've got the beginnings of a wall, Tony. I mean, we always knew that there were those big stones just immediately underneath the turf, but now we've got it stripped off. You can see there's a nice edge there, but we really need to be able to get down to confirm that that is a wall. We certainly can't date it, but we can begin to suggest that it is a chapel. Jackie was showing me some bone earlier on.
What you got, Jackie?
The bits that are really of interest are these pieces here. Now, these are bits of human femur, and it's quite a large individual. You can see these ridges running down here. This is where the big thigh muscles attach, and they really are quite rugged. So this is quite a large individual with quite chunky thighs.
So we've got a mystery of a big-thighed person somewhere on this island at some time. And he might not be the only burial here, because human bones are said to have been revealed as the cliff faces have eroded. Glastonbury acquired this land sometime in the 12th century, and legal documents suggest that there was already a chapel on the island at this time. At the chapel on the top of the island, it looks like we've found a potential north wall. And Ian's put in a new trench looking for the west end. On the other side of the water, we found steps coming down the hillside into the chapel on the mainland, chunky stone walls, and a floor surface carved out of the rock face. It seems to be deliberately terraced into the hillside at exactly the same height as the island chapel. Isn't it weird looking back at our chapel from this chapel?
It is, and yet this is strangely familiar. I mean, when you look at the size of this chapel and you think about the earthworks over there, they are very, very similar.
Can you see this, what looks like a wall running here? There's almost like faced stones coming through. Well, they're actually floating on top of this dirt.
We need to get to grips with this wall to find out whether there was a nave here before Glastonbury added a chancel. And Bridge and Oliver have now found some post holes that might prove Croft Andrews' theory that this nave was Celtic.
It would have been a hell of a job cutting through that rock, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I haven't excavated them yet, but having stuck my trowel down, they're at least this deep.
So do we think we've got our earlier chapel, our early timber chapel?
If you're very, very lucky. On the other hand, of course, they could be late. They could be post-dissolution for all we know.
Yeah.
But we've also got this other new feature that just come up, which may support an earlier structure. Can you see down here, we've got this wee gully, and it's been actually cut into the stone. It's at a right angle, and that could well be a timber slot for an earlier building.
And that's in line with those post holes as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Pilgrims who made it safely to the island chapel believed that St Michael would reward their bravery with time off purgatory, and were just beginning to uncover the nave where they would have stood.
Phil, I think I might have a piece of in situ flooring here.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the same sort of surface that we had on the mainland chapel yesterday, wasn't it? That was a mortared surface just like this, and it's patches directly on the natural bedrock. And this wall too, look, this wall here.
So what angle are we on there? Where's north?
Hang on, here we go. I'll tell exactly what angle we are. bang on east-west.
Don't get much better than that, does it?
Don't get much better than that.
This wall's convincing because chapels generally face the east, often orientated to the sunrise of their saint's day. Now we can really get our teeth into working out what it might have looked like.
1590, all these lovely ships.
Yes, that's amazing.
Because this is showing the disposition of the English and Spanish fleets at the Armada. It's a story map to some extent. But you can see along here, we've got what's called St Michael's Island at that stage, but it still shows a chapel. It depicts it with a tower, but I think you have to take that kind of with a pinch of salt.
We've got the wall now, it is bang on east-west.
Right.
Now the interesting thing now is what is happening in here, because we've got all this. These stones are mortared in, so this is actually masonry.
Right.
Now what I don't know, and I'm trying to resolve, is whether or not that wall comes along and turns. In other words, we're actually in the northeast corner of the chapel, or whether it's actually a big sort of swelling to take a buttress or a big column that might support a chancel arch.
Like the big stones we've got over here, in fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now you see down there, Matt had another wall.
Yeah.
Now, I did wonder at one stage whether or not that might be the south wall of the chapel. But now we've actually cleaned it up and looked at it, you can actually see that it's on a slightly different alignment. It's southwest to northeast.
Right.
So I'm rather hopeful, if it worked out all right for me, we'd have a wall coming here, be the northeast corner of the chapel.
Yeah.
This is the chapel. That would be a separate building outside it.
If Phil's right, the island chapel could be much smaller than the mainland chapel. So the theory that they were mirror images is looking a bit shaky. Beginning of day 3 here at Looe in Cornwall. We've got a chapel on the island over there. We've got another one at the top of the hill. And this morning we're going to open the stone-lined burial we found yesterday. One day left, and frustratingly, the tides won't let us out to the island for a couple of hours yet. Jack is already hard at work on the possible grave in the mainland chapel, because whoever lies inside it should be an important figure in our story.
It's all a little bit strange.
Strange in what way?
It's very narrow, but I think actually it's narrow. It looks narrow because of the pressure of material pushing down on here. You can see this stone here is angled. I suspect it was originally further over there. But I think we might find that there's something underneath these. I'm probably going to have to take those out.
Where do you think the end might be then, Jackie?
Well, you can see how the soil changes completely there. So I think it actually could be right over here. Given its position within the church, it could be a storage area for reliquaries. Although
What are reliquaries?
It's usually some kind of box or other kind of container in which you would store things like the bones of saints in your church.
Further down the hill, Raksha has found the missing wall of the monk's house that we were looking for yesterday, and it's a pretty substantial building.
We've got lovely coursing down this side, and we've got another one here. You can actually see this line going across here, so that's the inside of the building.
The standing remains show a 2-storey building. Croft Andrew found 2 small bedrooms for our monks, and we found the back wall of a refectory, which would have been used by pilgrims waiting to get to the island on feast days when they really did make a day of it.
Well, I don't think we've got anything in there.
This is an extraordinary find. Relics beneath the altar would have been displayed on feast days, drawing pilgrims to this chapel to make offerings. Frustratingly, the bones have long since been removed, so we can't date it.
Jackie, I've got bone here.
But in a different part of the chapel, Bridge thinks she's found another burial.
And it's human. Part of the human foot bone. You've got look to have
That's it.
more down there.
Yeah, there is a lot down here. You can see it's ranging from here to about here.
Yeah, so that looks like it's in situ, it's not moved anywhere.
So where's the grave cut?
Well, I think that these 2 large stones here, which end about here, mark one side of it. And what I've been thinking of as a wall here is actually marking the foot end of it.
This gets better and better. The small wall was Glastonbury's chancel, and this means that Bridge's burial could well be related to an earlier chapel. And now Oliver's convinced he's found it.
Well, the evidence, we've got these 2 whacking great post holes in front of us, but the killer piece of evidence is the fact that they align really nicely with the rock-cut feature stretching off into the distance there, and the fact that together they're on a different alignment to the walls that we can see, only by a couple of degrees, but I think it's significant.
If Oliver's right, it means a wooden chapel was here before the Glastonbury monks arrived, And the exciting news is that if Bridges' burial is related to it, a bone sample could actually date it. It's all getting pretty exciting over there, apparently, so we're going to leave a skeleton crew on the headland, which is fairly appropriate, I suppose, and the rest of us are going over to see what's happening. After we left, it seems our archaeological hermits made the most of their island experience. The big news is that Matt's found a burial carved into the bedrock. Ian thinks he's finally found the west wall of the chapel, and Tracy's cleaned up the possible standing stone. So, you've got a grave cut, haven't you?
This is it here, look. You can see it cut into the shale, going all the way along there. There's the wider head end, coming back down here.
Do my eyes deceive me, or is that a very big bone?
That is a very big shin bone. There's his foot there. Unfortunately, no knee bone and no sign of a thigh yet.
Do you think it might belong to the same person we found on the first day?
Well, in a way, I hope not, because that would mean the burial's been really disturbed.
Disturbed or not, if he's buried inside the building, he could be a significant figure in the chapel's history. That's a really curious-looking wall you've got there.
It's quite a complicated story, because here you've got this plaster here, and you can see the line of the wall continuing through here. So I think that this stone is actually added on, which implies to me that this is not just one chapel that was built and then that was it. Periodically, it was refurbished, it was strengthened, it was modified. It's a very, very long story.
And part of that story, the addition of the chancel, is exactly the same as we found on the mainland. But this isn't the only similarity. It looks like Matt's burial is in the same position as the reliquary in front of the altar. If only our big-boned man could tell us when he was buried, because we're running out of time to work out just how long this story is. But with a few hours left, we're putting another trench in, because Stuart spotted a ditch running all around the top of the hill, which might give us an idea of how long a chapel has stood here. We're only just below the surface, and already we've got some finds.
It's certainly medieval at the latest, probably earlier. It is handmade.
Just to throw a spanner in the works.
Okay.
Just found a Roman radius.
That may influence my decision about the pot. This could actually be a Romano British shirt then.
It looks like we're heading further back into the time of the Cornish saints, because the latest theory is that our burial and reliquary are from an even earlier chapel than the one Oliver found, which Glastonbury probably revamped by adding a chancel. And if so, pilgrims could have been coming to pay their respects to relics in this box long before Glastonbury's time. Meanwhile, the island has turned into a hive of activity. Kerry's trying to lift the possible standing stone, without much success. And it's all going on in the oval enclosure, where we've been pulling out a coin every 8 minutes. So far, there are 6.
Jonathan, that means one more coin and you've got another hoard to your name. You've got one beautiful coin here that you can clearly see the figurine of a goddess on the back.
Back on the lawns, the huge stone doesn't want to stand up, so Kerry's now burrowing under it.
It's smooth underneath, Tracy. I don't think there's anything under there. I think we can go for the standing stone.
Exciting as this is, it's undateable.
These are medieval sherds of pot. One's actually got a little spot of glazing, so that helps me a little bit. I think these are mid to late 13th century.
So how does that fit into the history of the island and this chapel, Nicholas?
Well, the late 13th century is when Glastonbury is giving up this site and bringing the monks back. But it's possible that this is one of the last monks or priors of the place. And if it's not that, it's the Lord or Lady of the Manor. It's clearly a very important grave. It's being excavated out of the rock. It's at a pole position in the church.
And Matt's burial isn't alone. Just as we're packing up, outside the west end of the chapel, Ian's found what looks like a kissed burial. But you're going to be staying here anyway, aren't you? So will you let us know at some time what it was?
Sure.
Cheers. Matt, we've got to go, like, now.
OK, let's go.
Even as we're loading onto the boat, another kissed burial emerges from under the south wall. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, Tiny.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, you're welcome.
It's beginning to look like this enclosure could have been a burial ground for thousands of years, maybe even into prehistory. Over the last few days, we've discovered that the story of our two chapels began long before Glastonbury's monks arrived, when Looe Island could well have been one of the earliest outposts of Christianity. And a chapel on the top would have been a beacon of hope for traders from the Mediterranean crossing formidable seas. Sometime later, another chapel was built on the mainland, at the same height, looking to the island, with our reliquary box at the altar for pilgrims to visit. And eventually, in the 12th century, Glastonbury's monks rebuilt both the chapels as a sort of St Michael theme park. Over the last 3 days, we've just scratched the surface of this magical island, which has been a very special place going way back long before Christianity.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
A few years ago, some geophys was done over some crop marks in that field up there, and it produced some of the most tantalising results that we've seen for years. Not only that, but a metal detectorist has found a tiny bit of Bronze Age gold up there, and lots of pottery has come up, including this 5th century piece. But this is Cornwall, this is Turkish, and this tiny little bit, believe it or not, is African. So what on earth's going on here? Well, evidence has been found suggesting ancient mariners plied these waters thousands of years ago, bringing in from overseas exotic goods such as wine, silk and papyrus, and taking away local tin and copper. So is there the remotest chance that this is the shadow of an early trading site, the like of which we've never seen on Time Team before? So, with the old geophys as our guide, we're going to start our investigation by opening 2 trenches, one in each of the fields that overlooks the beach. In the lower field, nearest the cove, Matt and Rakshar are putting a trench in over a large geophys anomaly, which doesn't much look like the traditional roundhouses in the other field. Could it be because the archaeology here, as Mick suspects, was linked to ancient trade? Whereas over in the upper field, Phil's investigating what could be an Iron Age roundhouse that wouldn't normally be associated with the types of finds previously discovered on this site. Finds that include pieces of Bronze Age axe, Roman coins, and of course the intriguing exotic 5th and 6th century pottery from overseas. In fact, we could be looking at 1,000 years of activity. But unfortunately, most of this material has been found lying about on the ground, and that means the archaeologists can't use it to date anything here. One thing that fascinates me about this geophys is that they seem to have really thick walls around these houses.
What I think you've got is an outer stone face, a core of rubbish midden material, and then another inner stone core. So it's a composite wall.
Does cavity rubbish insulation make any sense to you, Francis?
Well, sort of sense, Tony, yeah. I think the main thing is you've got structure. You may have finds actually on the floor in the central hearths, but what that geophys tells me is that those houses are very undisturbed.
Well, we've dug prehistoric roundhouses before on Time Team, and circles like this do suggest the remains of a mud or stone house roofed with thatch or turf. It might also be surrounded by a ditch to drain away the rainwater, while inside there's normally a hearth for the family fire. But although archaeologically they're fairly easy to uncover, it's much more difficult to date a prehistoric house. What you need are finds.
This is a Roman coin, which is nice to see because several others have been found in the field by the metal detectorists.
Why do you say that's Roman?
From its shape, it's been hammered by using a hand hammer, and also I can probably go even a bit further.
Go on.
And say that it's most likely from the Emperor Hadrian, who was around about the 2nd century AD.
So confident and in front of a television camera.
That's experience.
Look at that. How many of you could tell that that was a coin of the Emperor Hadrian? So our first piece of dating material puts Matt's trench firmly into the Roman period, possibly centuries after our potential prehistoric settlement in the other field. That is, if we can find it, because at the moment all we've got in Phil's trench are a series of strange stone features. John is simply bemused and confused.
Well, I mean, you've definitely got a good edge swinging round there.
Back in the lower field, Matt's on a roll.
Pottery, prehistoric.
It's Cornish, what we call native courseware. I wouldn't like to say whether it was Iron Age or Roman, because it doesn't change a great deal, but it's that kind of period. So,
And that's just out of the edge here, where this natural's cut away into this silt stuff, isn't it?
So stratified among this material, it's good dating evidence.
I think here's the second one. That's a rim. There you go.
Yeah, it looks like the base of a straight-sided jar. Again, native courseware, and look at the state of the pot. It's obviously been used for cooking.
Yeah, really burnt.
So that's great.
The geophysics showed this huge ring in this field here, and this is the ring here. It's this ditch.
Ah, so that is actually that.
Yeah, it goes all the way around like that. So now I'm walking into the house, and you can see that the soil's kind of going this dark grey colour, especially around here. That's because there's so much charcoal in here. And we found some burnt animal bone up there as well, so I mean, there's just their rubbish all over the floor, really.
Is this the wall on the other side?
Now, according to the geophysics, the ditch there, the wall ditch, should go round behind you and should be at the other end of the trench there. So this should be about the centre of the house.
So is this the hearth that's producing all the charcoal and burnt material?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Right.
You've got finds in the finds tray?
Yep, we've some great stuff out of here.
And there's another bit down there?
Yep, there's another bit in situ down there, you can see. That's a bit of amphora.
So these are these big wine or oil storage jars, and this is coming from the East Mediterranean then?
Yep, that's post-Roman as well, that's 5th or 6th century.
So if this isn't my outside wall, where is the other outside wall?
Well, according to the geophysics, it should be right about the other end of the trench there.
Right here somewhere?
Yep.
Raksha, can you stand up for a sec? And the other wall is where Raksha is. If that's right, it's a heck of a big building, mate.
It's a huge building, especially if it's producing material like this post-Roman stuff. That's really exciting.
Why would it be so significant if it was that sort of date?
Because we don't get structures that are sort of post-Roman very often, particularly with the finds associated with them.
And this is the so-called Dark Ages because we don't know very much about it.
Usually because we can't tell her of that period because we haven't got the finds to go with them.
So if this is 5th or 6th century, then this could actually be illuminating the Dark Ages, which isn't a bad job for tomorrow, is it? The star find in Matt's trench yesterday was this small piece of Turkish pottery that had somehow travelled hundreds, even thousands of miles from the Mediterranean ports to Cornwall in the 5th or 6th century. And it's this evidence, along with the pieces of African pot that have already been found, that lead archaeologists to believe our cove could once have been visited by ships from all over southern Europe. The problem for me is it seems an odd place to put a harbour.
This is the modern map, and our site is just in there. And you can see immediately how sheltered it is round the back of this headland here. You've got the full force of the Atlantic coming up here, but if you come round here, it's perfectly sheltered. This green area is all sands, which you wouldn't really want to bring a boat over. And the main channel of the Camel is out in the middle now, going off down the estuary, down up towards Padstow.
If they can tell how deep the channel was in ancient times, then we should be able to work out how big a boat could have sailed here thousands of years ago.
Got some lovely bits of pottery coming up now, Carl.
Over in the Iron Age settlement, it looks like Phil's made the breakthrough he's been hoping for. The confusing strips of rock are beginning to reveal a recognisable shape. And there's at last some datable pottery from the trench.
Oh, that's fantastic. This is the first distinctive Iron Age sherd I've seen on the site. I can tell that because it's very upright in nature, whereas the Roman ones are much more folded over. Probably sort of late 3rd, early 2nd century BC.
So there's absolutely no doubt this could not be into the Roman period?
No, this is definitely Iron Age from the upright nature of the rim.
I mean, the thing that strikes me is that sherd and the others with it are so big and in such good condition they can only have come from this building.
It's not looking really quite as round as it was. It's more rectangular or something.
It's not looking quite as round as it was. That is archaeology speak, isn't it?
Perhaps not round at all, but more... I mean, it could be rectangular.
Right place for a trading post, whereas John Giaffiz has put his money on something like a workshop. Either way, if we're lucky, we should get more information about where our ancient traders were from and when they visited.
Oh,
Oh,
look at that.
Is that Samian?
Well, I think it is, except that it's so badly decayed. Look, all the really bright red has worn off. But look, it's got this sort of spirally pattern going round there and round there.
It's very abraded.
Well, it is, that is. But at least it's good Roman.
But at this stage, it's impossible to tell if a good Roman was actually here. Over in the other field, we have a whole prehistoric village to deal with. And Francis is now looking for signs of the first settlers, possibly from the Bronze Age.
Going down in.
If Francis does uncover a prehistoric trackway, it could push the date of our site back by another 1,000 years.
Now that's the same 5th and 6th century stuff that we had from this trench before.
This is really high status stuff. I mean, it would have had wine or olive oil in it. But, I mean, you just don't find this sort of thing on most British sites. And, I mean, to find one really fresh sherd, it hasn't been lying around for long. So that's got straight into the ground. And there's another one directly underneath it.
Let's get that bit out as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're from the same pot. What's the betting I can get them to join?
I'll get you a drink if you can sort it out. Oh,
there you go.
Oh, you're a pint.
You owe me a pint, Matt. Yes, beautiful.
I'm glad we've got an experienced archaeologist on this dig. This may be the least convincing pot reconstruction ever, but it's yet more evidence of trade. In this case, oil or wine, coming along this coast in the 5th or 6th century. What about the date?
Now, that's a tricky one. We know that this droveway is in a terrace that was ground down by animals' hooves over hundreds of years, probably. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if this droveway didn't begin in the Bronze Age, then go on into the Iron Age when it was formalised by the ditches. So, for all we know, there could be 1,000 years of settlement on this hillside.
Thank you, Francis. That's why this cluster of houses was such a peculiar shape. We simply haven't been able to find any material evidence that links roundhouses to the port complex next door. But with such a dense collection of sturdy large houses, I can't help but think this village must have benefited from the prosperity a successful port brings. It's a theory that would appear to fit in with Stuart's latest piece of work, because he believes our site was managed by a powerful tribe.
You see the headland all the way around here. The village is in here. And if you look between these two curves, you see that line?
Oh, you've got a bank and a ditch running across.
And when you look in the field, you can actually see it. See
Yeah.
it to the right, going across the fields?
And across the track into the next field.
There's a bank and ditch that cuts off that entire headland.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's a classic promontory fort of the Iron Age where you control the headland and cut it off. And I think that's why the village is here. It's kind of supporting that centre. And indeed, the linearity of that settlement and its direction we've puzzled about. And when you look at it, it's on this line here. And it points literally towards where you ought to cross into this tribal or chieftain centre upon the hill. I think its orientation is because it's geared towards that centre up there.
Yeah, but I think it would be a mistake to think that the headland and the political centre up there actually had many people living on it. I think the people were actually living in our settlement over there, and because they're on the best agricultural land, whereas up there they'd have been wind blasted and exposed, and I think these people were supporting the headland.
Throughout the day in Phil's Harbour Trench, we've been building up a picture of Roman traders. We found coins, Samian ware, slag and food waste. But we've been missing a crucial piece of evidence until now.
These, Tony, are African red slipware sherds, which down here in Cornwall generally mean 5th and 6th century deposits.
So that's post-Roman?
Indeed, yes.
And where were they found?
Well, this is the important thing. Those sherds were found in there. In other words, they are well stratified. All the other sherds that we've had of that type of pottery have been in the colluvium, the hill wash, so they're totally unstratified. The stratification for them is good.
Now that's digging speak for undisturbed archaeology. And it proves that these Byzantine finds in Phil's Trench are contemporary with Matt's finds next door. Although we didn't find any proof to link our two fields, we now believe the whole site probably evolved over many hundreds of years from a Bronze Age farming community into one of the small but bustling late Iron Age trading centres scattered around the Cornish coast, meeting the demands for local commodities as the Roman Empire expanded. After the Romans disappeared in the 5th century, merchants would have continued to call in occasionally with their exotic goods until the Byzantine Empire faded several hundred years later. It's lovely, isn't it? The perfect Cornish seaside picture with fields rolling down to the sea. It's hard to imagine just how busy it must have been in the ancient past, with a thriving settlement trading with ships sailing in from the continent and beyond. And as they came in below that cliff just there, they would have brought with them fancy goods like oil and wine and new ideas too. Perfectly symbolised by this find that's come up in the last hour or so. It's a stylus, possibly the earliest evidence of writing ever found in Cornwall, dating from around 200 AD. Maybe it was used to record all those imports.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.